In 2014, the world watched in shock and disbelief as Russia illegally annexed Crimea, a peninsula in southern Ukraine. In 2022, the unthinkable once again became reality as the Russian forces launched a massive invasion of Ukraine. However, since this devastating invasion started, Ukraine vowed to do one thing: take Crimea back. And in 2024, a decade after the unlawful annexation, it seems that Ukraine is closer than ever to making good on its promise. The Ukrainian drones have been wreaking havoc in the Black Sea. The country managed to deal a few decisive blows to the militarily superior Russia, crippling its capabilities in the region, and the Russian naval forces have all but abandoned Crimea, with reports of only a lone warship remaining in the area, a stark contrast to the once heavily fortified Russian presence. So is this it? Has the siege of Crimea begun? And more importantly, can Ukraine sustain this momentum and finally reclaim its rightful territory? Keep watching to find out. There's no doubt about it, history is unfolding before our very eyes in Crimea. But to understand why this region has been a flashpoint for conflict, we must delve into its complex past and geopolitical significance first. Believe it or not, Russians and Ukrainians aren't the first nations to fight over Crimea. Throughout history, the region was contested by the likes of the ancient Greeks, Romans, Turks, and Mongols. But why? Two reasons: strategic location and abundant resources. You see, Crimea's position on the Black Sea and its access to important trade routes made it a valuable prize to empires throughout history. However, one empire that particularly valued Crimea was the Russian Empire. This peninsula was nothing short of a crown jewel for several czars. It all began in 1783, when the Russian Empire annexed Crimea from the Crimean Khanate. Apparently, annexation has always been Russia's favorite hobby. Crimea remained a crucial part of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union, but not without a fair share of challenges and conflicts. During World War II, the Nazis invaded the Crimean Peninsula as part of Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union. The Soviet defenders, including many Crimean Tatars, put up a fierce resistance, but they were eventually overwhelmed and the region fell under German occupation. So how did the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin thank Tatars for their brave efforts and sacrifices during the invasion? By accusing them of collaborating with the Nazis. Not even a week after recapturing Crimea on May 12, 1944, Stalin deported Crimean Tatars, all 200,000 of them, to Central Asia in what is remembered as one of the most ruthless and fastest total ethnic cleansings of the 20th century. 4 decades would pass before Tatars were allowed to return to Crimea in the 1980s, but by this point, Crimea was no longer their home. It was now populated by ethnic Russians and Ukrainians. Tatars, once the indigenous population of the Crimean Peninsula, were now the minority. To make matters worse, they were also heavily vilified and persecuted upon their return. That explains how Russians and Ukrainians came to live in Crimea, but how did the peninsula become part of Ukraine in the first place? Well, this actually happened before the return of the Tatars in 1954 specifically. The Soviet leadership, under the Communist Party First Secretary Nikita Khrushchev, decided to transfer the Crimean Oblast from the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which has always had close ties to the region. Of course, at that time, this transfer was largely symbolic, as Ukraine and Russia were part of the same country, the Soviet Union. This decision was made to commemorate the 300th anniversary of the Treaty of Pereyaslav, which was seen as the foundation of the unity between Ukraine and Russia. Unity that's now long gone and that saw its first major rupture in 1991. It was that year that Ukraine officially became independent. However, most of the Crimean population wasn't happy about this independence. After all, roughly 75% of this population was comprised of Russians loyal to Moscow. And let's not forget, Russia's Black Sea Fleet was stationed in Sevastopol, Crimea's largest city. So Crimea was granted the status of an autonomous republic on January 20, 1991. However, this status only lasted for 4 years before being forcibly abolished by Ukraine in 1995. Since then, Crimea has been decidedly under Ukrainian authority. As we now know, this also had an expiration date, but we aren't there yet. For now, let's expand on why Crimea matters to both Russia and Ukraine, so much so that some experts believe that the side that controls Crimea will eventually win the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war. Let's start with Russia. Crimea has huge strategic value to this country for several reasons. Arguably, the most critical among these reasons is the access to the Russian naval base at Sevastopol. Russia's naval armada stationed there, the Black Sea Fleet, is a formidable force of about 25,000 mariners and 39 warships. Additionally, Russia wants Crimea for its favorable geographical position. Thanks to this peninsula, the country gains access to various sea routes in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. There's also an important economic reason behind wanting Crimea so badly. The region is rich in natural resources, including abundant oil and gas reserves. While Crimea was under Ukraine's control, Russia saw less and less energy imports from the region. Of course, after annexing the peninsula, this all changed, allowing Russia to boost its energy security. So we have strong strategic, geographic, and economic reasons behind Russia's desire to control Crimea. But there's one more reason: politics. As we slowly turn toward Crimea's ultimate fate, let's take an important stop at 2014, the year of the annexation by Russia. At that time, Russia's President Vladimir Putin saw that the West was increasingly expressing interest in Ukraine. In his mind, he had to make this possibility of establishing stronger ties significantly less attractive to the Western powers. He also had to send a message loud and clear: Russia won't tolerate any further encroachment on its sphere of influence. On February 27, 2014, masked Russian special forces with no uniform insignia and armed to the teeth began to occupy Crimea. The soldiers, dubbed the Little Green Men due to their unmarked green uniforms, started by seizing several strategic sites, including important military bases and the airport. Then the Russian troops occupied Crimea's parliament, dismissed its government, and installed a pro-Russian one. These senseless moves were followed by a bogus referendum on March 16th, when 97% of the Crimean people supposedly voted to join Russia. Of course, supposedly is the key word here, as the referendum was held under Russia's occupation and without any international oversight. But since when has international law ever stopped Putin in his reckless quest for power and control? So the very next day, on March 17, 2024, Crimea's authorities declared independence and requested to join Russia. On March 21st, Putin approved this questionable request, officially making Crimea part of Russia. This action greatly improved Putin's popularity, at least among the Russians. After the 2014 annexation, Putin experienced a massive surge in popularity and support within Russia. His approval rating soared to 86%, almost reaching the record-high 88% he enjoyed after Russia's brief war with Georgia. Naturally, the Ukrainians had no similar sentiment toward Putin and Russia. After all, Crimea is a symbol of national pride and identity for the Ukrainian people, so it shouldn't be surprising that the liberation of Crimea is among the few issues virtually all Ukrainians can agree on. Despite all the hardships they've been through, as many as 80% of Ukrainians aren't agreeable to any territorial concessions, even if this means the war on its soil rages on. However, Crimea's liberation is much more than just a matter of national pride. With the peninsula under Russia's control, Ukraine will never truly be safe. But let's face it, neither will the entire region. If Russia keeps viewing the Black Sea as its personal backyard, the region can easily become a hotspot for further conflict and instability. The country's run-ins with Turkey in the Black Sea might just be the beginning. Though no shots were fired during Russia's annexation of Crimea, this event unofficially started the Russo-Ukrainian War. The annexation and the lack of punishment for Putin also undoubtedly paved the way for the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, which has so far claimed the lives of over 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers. And that's just the Ukrainian estimate. According to some US estimates, this figure is much higher, with over 70,000 soldiers dead and many more injured. Now, we won't delve into the early days of the 2022 invasion, as Crimea would only become a focal point later on. Though to be fair, the issue of Crimea has been part of every single round of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. During these peace talks, one thing has become abundantly clear: no side is willing to make any concessions regarding this region. In the words of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the Russo-Ukrainian War began with Crimea and it will end with Crimea. But what are Zelensky and Ukraine doing to ensure this war and the issue of Crimea ends in their favor? They've seemingly started the siege of Crimea, that's what. By now, you know the drill. We can't just jump straight into the current state of Crimea without first touching on Ukraine's biggest victories in the region. First up, the July 2023 Crimean Bridge explosion. The 12-mile bridge, also known as the Kerch Strait Bridge or simply Kerch Bridge, links the Crimean Peninsula to the Russian mainland. As such, it serves as a vital supply line for Russia's war effort, or at least it did. However, this isn't the only reason the Crimean Bridge is so significant. You see, this $3.7 billion bridge was only built after the annexation of Crimea. As such, it's nothing more than a physical expression of Putin's twisted desire to bind Ukraine to Russia forever. The July 2023 attack on the bridge, and everything it stands for, was conducted as a joint operation of the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, and the country's naval forces. It was carried out by naval drones in two separate strikes some 15 minutes apart, which blew up a part of the bridge. Interestingly, drones were behind many other Ukrainian victories in Crimea, and their range of successful targets is nothing short of extraordinary. The Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol, airfields, railways and roads, all of this without a traditional manned navy, and it doesn't stop there. Ukrainian drones have also targeted Russian naval vessels, making many of them flee to Russian ports hundreds of miles away. There are also reports that the Ukrainian military managed to take out a Russian warship using marine drones in an overnight attack in February 2024. 6 drones were reportedly involved in the attack, each able to carry over 600 pounds of explosive. Though Russia hasn't said anything about the attack, there's a video clearly showing an Ivanovets missile boat rolling to its stern and sinking after multiple hits to its hull. These and similar attacks are accomplishing one thing: completely changing the dynamics in the Black Sea. Now, Ukraine is in charge and Russia can no longer conduct exercises in the Black Sea safely. This drastic shift is also the reason why many experts believe the siege of Crimea has truly begun. Let's briefly recap how this siege is playing out. Although the Ukrainian attacks didn't manage to damage the structure of the Crimean bridge, they did accomplish one monumental thing. Military supplies are no longer being sent across this bridge. Why? It's simply too dangerous. A new attack might be right around the corner, and the Kremlin doesn't want valuable resources going to waste this way. But the Crimean bridge isn't the only strategic point Ukraine has taken care of. The country's military has also been targeting other crucial elements like tank landing ships, also known as LSTs, which can move supplies across the Azov Sea, and dry docks in Sevastopol. This is just one of the ways Ukraine has been able to keep the pressure on Russia. Another way, this brings us back to drones. As we mentioned, Ukrainian drones are wreaking havoc in the Black Sea, and no vessel is safe. That's why it shouldn't be surprising that some reports suggest that Russia's Black Sea Fleet has almost abandoned Crimea. If these reports are to be believed, there's only one Russian warship left. The warship is reportedly able to fire cruise missiles but hasn't done so yet. That might be the reason the Ukrainian Navy spokesperson Dmytro Pletenchuk labeled the ship as a loser. The current situation in Crimea means that Ukraine is one step away from achieving a major goal, completely eliminating the presence of Russian military ships in the Black Sea region. However, the sea isn't the only area the Ukrainians want to be free of the Russians. There's the sky as well. In February 2024, Ukraine's Air Force damaged 3 Russian aircraft at the Belbek military airfield using the Scalp Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles. The very next month, a Russian Su-35 flanker fighter jet was downed, crashing into the Sea of Sevastopol. Though there isn't an official confirmation of the cause of the crash, many experts speculate that the aircraft was shot down. All of these Ukrainian actions have undoubtedly given hope that Ukraine is gaining the upper hand in Crimea, possibly signaling a decisive turning tide in the Russo-Ukrainian war. But can Ukraine truly go all the way? Can it liberate Crimea? Interestingly, for many stakeholders, the question isn't can Ukraine liberate Crimea, but should Ukraine liberate Crimea? Let's explain. You see, the Kremlin has repeatedly driven home a single message: if things don't go our way, the nukes are coming in. Though Putin still hasn't directly threatened to use nuclear weapons over the Crimea issue, this scenario can't be entirely dismissed. Now, whether there's any truth to these suggestions of nukes or they're nothing but a desperate bluff by a desperate man isn't important at the moment. What is important is that many countries seem to believe that they are truthful. As a result, there seems to be a kind of paralysis in the international community, a reluctance to take decisive action on Crimea. That probably explains why Paris, Berlin, and even Washington aren't exactly rushing to arm Ukraine to retake Crimea and Donbass. According to some experts, Mariupol is fair game, but anything beyond that is crossing a line. Let's say Ukraine does decide to go through with it and cross that line. What will happen? In other words, let's revisit the "can Ukraine liberate Crimea" question. To do so, Ukraine would have to accomplish 3 things. Number 1. Demolish the entire Crimean bridge. Though the structure isn't currently used to transport military supplies, it doesn't mean it'll stay that way. However, such a massive bridge can't possibly be brought down with a few drones. This endeavor would require a lot of strategically placed explosives. Of course, these explosives can't just be placed in broad daylight. The Ukrainian military would have to carry out a complex operation involving deception and misdirection to pull off this feat successfully. Now, to be fair, the Ukrainian military has proven itself already to be rather clever and savvy, so there's a chance that they could successfully execute such a plan. However, this would be an immensely risky move that could easily lead to further escalation of the conflict. The same goes for taking out all Russian military capabilities in Crimea, which is also the second step to retaking it. Now, this video might have highlighted recent Ukrainian wins in Crimea, but this doesn't mean Russia hasn't had any. The sad reality is that Russia is simply superior to Ukraine military-wise, and it's demonstrated so on several occasions. And let's not forget that Russia has one of the strongest navies in the world, often topping the list of the highest number of naval vessels such as submarines, frigates, and destroyers. So even if Ukraine manages to drive away the remaining ships from Crimea, who's to say they won't come back next time with a few friends? Russia's military superiority also poses an obstacle to the third step Ukraine would have to make to regain Crimea: regain control of key strategic areas. When you assess these three conditions in more detail, it becomes clear why Poland's president Andrzej Duda had expressed doubts over Ukraine's ability to take back Crimea. And Poland has been one of Ukraine's staunchest supporters since the beginning of the invasion. But if you remember, everyone also believed that Kyiv would fall in a matter of days once the invasion started. And yet here we are 2 years later, with Kyiv still under Ukrainian control, so let's give Ukraine some credit. After all, its military has managed to hold the front lines despite the so-called ammunition famine over the last couple of months. The only major loss was Avdiivka, a town in the east, the first city to fall in over 9 months. But how did they do it? By consolidating around defensive positions and relying on precision munitions and FPV drones. For the most part, Russia isn't investing in precision munitions. The country's military is all about weapons of mass terror and destruction. Take the Tsar bomber as an example. This 25-ton thermonuclear bomb is the largest nuclear device ever created, and it was created back in 1961. When it was tested, the explosion produced approximately 57,000 kilotons of energy, the most powerful human-made explosion ever recorded. For comparison's sake, the largest nuclear device the US has ever tested only produced 15,000 kilotons, and the only nuclear devices ever used in combat, the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, only produced around 15 and 20 kilotons respectively. Of course, it seems wrong to say only, as these two atomic bombs left behind a legacy of tragedy and devastation, yet they pale in comparison to the destructive potential of the Tsar bomber. So you can see why the world doesn't take Putin's threat of nuclear detonation lightly. However, you can also see how Russia's focus on these large-scale weapons has given Ukraine a potential advantage in the conflict. And do you know what else gives Ukraine an advantage? The complete and utter lack of motivation in the Russian military ranks. As Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commander of the US Forces Europe, puts it, I don't think you could fill up a school bus with Russian soldiers that actually want to be there. Yet Russia will call up another 300,000 people every 2 months or so, despite not having the ability to train such a huge number of people adequately, especially when they lost so many of their more experienced officers. Another operation that has seemingly yielded great results is targeting Russia's oil refineries with, you guessed it, AI-powered drones. So far, these drones have hit 18 Russian oil refineries with a combined capacity of 3.9 million barrels per day. The goal of these attacks is simple: to weaken Russia's ability to sustain its war efforts. Yet not everyone seems to agree with this strategy. Believe it or not, the US, Ukraine's single biggest aid donor, is one of them. There are even reports that the US administration warned Kyiv to knock off these attacks. Why? Because they can drive up crude oil prices. Yep, that's the reason. It seems almost cruel to forbid Ukraine from going after Russia's oil and gas infrastructure when Russia has been terrorizing Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Plus, oil is a crucial part of Russia's war machine. But none of this matters to the US and allies if the consequences of Ukraine's attacks could lead to wider economic instability and hardships for many around the world. Some speculate that these attacks are also the reason Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, rushed to Kyiv in March 2024. Sure, this covert visit was done under the guise of reaffirming the United States' unwavering commitment to Ukraine in its self-defense against Russia's brutal invasion. However, considering that this visit was unannounced and came in the wake of Ukraine's oil refinery hits, it's easy to put 2 and 2 together. As far as Ukraine is concerned, oil refineries are absolutely legitimate targets. As Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Ola Stefanishina put it, Ukraine is simply defending its country to the best of its abilities. So where does this all leave us in regard to Crimea? Well, there are 3 major currents regarding how the Crimea issue will be resolved. The first concludes that Russia will not relinquish Crimea under any circumstances, even if it has to usher in a new era of nuclear conflict. The second believes that Russia can be defeated and even driven from Crimea. However, this option depends on how well Ukraine will be supplied with Western weaponry in the coming months. If all goes according to plan, Ukraine should have a shot at achieving its final military goals in 2025. This means that for now, the country should eat away at Russia's defenses quietly yet diligently, as no good can come from over-the-top moves. And the last current sees the Cyprus solution as the only viable option for Crimea. But what is the Cyprus solution, and how could it apply to Crimea? Well, Cyprus, an island in the eastern Mediterranean, has been divided since 1974 into the internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus, predominantly inhabited by Greek Cypriots, and the self-declared Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, recognized only by Turkey. In the context of Crimea, the Cyprus solution could imply a simpler scenario, where Crimea remains under de facto Russian control but is recognized internationally as part of Ukraine. The idea is to find a compromise that satisfies both Ukraine's sovereignty and the interests of the Russian-speaking population in Crimea, while also reducing tensions and avoiding further conflict. If the war was to end this way, Ukraine would retain its independence, over 80% of its legal territory, and its freedom to develop as a Western democracy. Though this wouldn't be a complete victory, it would surely be a victory. But what do you think? Which of these scenarios is the most likely to happen? Or do you have another scenario in mind? Let us know in the comments section below. Now go and check out why Russia's navy is in serious trouble, or click this other video instead.